Ahoy! In this video I would like to show you why I enjoy open world PvP in New World so much. This was the first large-scale PvP that I was a part of. Before that I only had a few brief skirmishes where I basically got ran over. I didn't have any PvP experience essentially at the point, and somebody was saying that in the region I was in, we're gonna do PvP, we're gonna take the fort and whatnot. And I was just like, okay, let's just try it out. Let's just see what happens. And a lot of things happened. So first I went to the fort and I was waiting there trying to see what I was supposed to defend in the first place. I had no idea how the forts even worked. Essentially, they are a bonus to certain effects, and if you do missions afterwards, you can get control of areas better, which then feeds into a whole other chain that leads to wars. But I had no idea about that. I just went there because I wanted to fight. And I came there and no one was there, and I was a bit confused. Eventually, more people of my faction, the Marauders, showed up. And I didn't really know what we were doing, so I just followed them. So there was apparently an attack before that didn't happen again, and the decision was, okay, we have the fort. What we're going to do now is PvP missions. PvP missions are how you increase your team's influence in an area. Again, that eventually leads to war and allows you to control the territory. And in order to do that, we had to get through these missions first, which would likely mean that we would meet some resistance along the way. So our first step was going back to town and picking up the PvP missions. This automatically flags you for PvP, and this is where the journey really started. Now, I heard from the others that we were gathering outside the town gates, so that was what I decided to do as well. I, at this point, again, had no PvP experience, I had no PvP gear, no PvP spec or anything of that sort, and I ran out there and I saw a lot of red signs, meaning enemies. That didn't scare me though, because if you walk out of a town, you actually have a brief immunity period where you cannot PvP and cannot be attacked by PvPers. You can see that at the bottom right, there is a little timer that shows up right now. So you have 30 seconds before you can join the fight, so that it stays fair. You can also, if you look at the bottom, see my XP bar, which is something we can look at later as well, because that's pretty interesting too. So here I'm getting ready to fight because my time is about to run out, and now we're in PvP. Obviously a very lucky start here because we're right in a situation where we can pick off someone who is on their own in a group of players. Now something really cool about PvP in New World is that the PvP essentially scales to your level. So even a level 1 player can technically, well not level 1 but maybe a level 10 player can technically beat a level 60 player. I'll explain that in more detail in a future video, but it's worth knowing here that even though some players may have been higher or lower level, PvP wise it's relatively fair. And weapon levels actually matter more than your player level in some situations. So we got our first few picks, but it was a little bit chaotic. We didn't really quite know where to go. I think some of the other players were in comms because two groups here belong to very large companies, large clans. But I was not part of that, so I had no idea what was going on. I was just kind of walking around, trying to see if I could see any red, because red means dead. And that was all I aimed for, and it worked out for a better amount of time, I would say. There were two groups here that I can name specifically. One is Paramount, and the other one is Varangian Guard, which are both relatively large Marauder groups, Marauder being my faction, the green guys. And I actually joined English. The Varangian Guard later on, but at this point I was not part of any of those groups yet. And it's also funny to see some of the names here that I would see more frequently later on. We'll get back to that, but like D-Slam I think is the leader of Paramount. So he was kind of coordinating this whole thing. But then there were also a lot of higher ranking people from the other clan, from Varangian Guard in there. We got a little bit more fights going on. The enemy decided to push forward, and this is kind of how the strategy was going. It was kind of a back and forth in terms of pushes. Always trying to outnumber the enemies where you can, outflank them. And I was technically a frontliner. I had very heavy armor, I was in tank gear so to speak, but with weapons that didn't really facilitate that because they were like more like DPS weapons. Again, I didn't really know what I was doing anyways. And I was therefore relatively immobile due to the heavy armor, but didn't quite have the chase potential with the weaponry that I combined here, or the best scalings or anything, but you know, that was fine. It was a learning experience. It's more about the fun. And I really, really love the atmosphere in these moments. You just see this red wall on the horizon and your green party around you swarming in, or the other way around. It is just really, really cool. The PvP, again, very messy. Often just a lot of people trying to pick a single target. Here at the start at least, because we were so close to the town in the beginning that it was really easy for the enemies to just stay in a group, and for us to stay in a group and just zerg on whoever dares to come too close. Because they would even be able to go back into town and get the neutrality there, the immunity, once they go there. What you actually see there is that there's some yellow in there and some purple, which are the two other factions, meaning there were actually 3 different factions in the war here at the same time. And I think, to some degree, they must have been fighting each other as well. I know that we both, like, we ended up fighting both yellow and purple a little bit, but it seemed that everyone was kind of fighting here and there. So that made things even more chaotic, which I thought was super fun. In many ways, this reminded me of classic World of Warcraft, or vanilla World of Warcraft rather, PvP, when also no one really knew what they were doing yet. Everyone was just trying to get a kill somewhere. It got laggy at times back then, way laggier than New World, of course, because it was back when the internet in general was a lot slower, and everyone was just having a good time. So that was the same vibe for me here. And the game really encourages this type of PvP as well, which you can see, for example, from the weapon skill that you gain when doing PvP. You get a massive amount of weapon skill and even XP. What you can see now, I told you to look at the XP bar earlier, I'm already a level higher at this point. I've already reached multiple XP bars, essentially, to make it to the next level. And that is something that you can also do with PvE quests, of course, but it feels at times relatively quick, at least with PvP, given that we're only 5 minutes into the fight here. And again, this is just so atmospheric as well. I love the whole fog that is going on around us, the whole swamp atmosphere that we had there. That made it hard to see sometimes what was going on. Obviously, you can kind of see the enemies because of their red marks, but they could technically even like crouch and crawl and hide in the grass, and therefore hide their marks as well, make them harder to see. If they would actually want to strategize that way, they could really do nasty ambushes with that. Instead, we were all just kind of running in the front line, because I don't think anyone knew that at that point, or not many people at least. The spear I was using deals decent damage, as you can see here, but it's really hard to use in terms of staying in range of an enemy. Whereas the hatchet that I'm using is and was one of the strongest melee weapons, because it gives you a ton of sustain, a ton of mobility, and also a passive that allows you to not die for a few seconds when you're close to death, which all in all means you can punch an enemy very long without much strategy and often have the chance to win the fight that way, which is not so much the case for other weapons. Especially the spear actually requires a lot of strategy that I didn't really have at that point. If you walk through the water, you also have to be very careful. There, the water was fine because you don't get slowed down there, but in some areas you really will. So that is something you have to watch out with. You see us here getting pushed away further from town, really, and regrouping. What I found a little bit unfortunate is that a lot of the players were primarily fighting from range. A lot of them didn't really want to go in, and obviously, with my weapons, that wasn't really ideal. If I had a ranged weapon, that would have looked different. But that is why a lot of us kind of just sitting there and waiting for something to happen. But I think a lot of abilities were out of range anyways. So you have the healing getting thrown into the air as well. And again, this massive, massive wall of enemies, which was so cool. I really loved that. It's like, it's not demonstrating the high skill PvP that you can do. This is, by the way, where I tried laying down in the bush and I was like, can they even see me? And I think they did not. I think when I was laying down there, they really couldn't see me, except for the one that hit me with a dot. Though I'm not sure if the dot maybe reveals me. And here I just quickly pulled away the UI entirely. I just wanted to see what it looks like. Just focusing on the atmospheric component of it, because I thought it was just so cool, like this massive battle going on. And I don't know, it just it just gave me such cool vibes. So I was like, if I die here, it's gonna be worth it. But it actually turned out it was just my allies around me anyway, so that wasn't a problem. So again, we see this back and forth here. So this is something that is, I think, much more encouraged in the forts and in the wars, where you really have to positioned very strategically, whereas in the open world, you can use it to your advantage, but it's not something that is being done as much. But yeah, I really like that about it. I really like that there is this positioning advantage that you can get from, for example, fight an enemy from a hill, which we'll see later as well. That makes it harder for the enemy to access you before they can deal damage to you. And yeah, and the ambushes that you can technically do if you're a little bit more experienced. Now at this point, it was kind of more of a, what are we even doing? We kind of got to the point where we realized that we're not really going anywhere with what we're doing. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, because the next part, I think, is going to be very interesting. So eventually, we got the message that we would now go to the area where the PvP quest is. And again, this was extremely cool because it was also extremely atmospheric. So we kind of just decided to walk straight over there. And not everyone was actually at the level that was necessary to even easily go there. As you can see, we have level 34 mobs here, and some of the players were like in their level 20s. I was fortunately a little bit higher already. I could kill these enemies quite decently, get some extra XP on the way as well. And we had to go through this area that we had to hold for 1.5 minutes. And we eventually had to cross the river, which I just wanted to show because it looked so cool. And what you see me doing here is using my damaging abilities, because they give you a little bit of extra mobility while in the water. So that would allow us to cross a little bit faster. As we got out of the water eventually, I kind of realized that we shouldn't have done that in the first place. We should have just walked a little bit around the river and it would have been much, much shorter. But again, we didn't really know much yet. We just did whatever. And we came into this foggy area, which was where we were supposed to hold this point. So you can see the timer on the PvP mission on the right there. Mission number 2, Show of Strength, is now going down. So this is our mission. We just have to hold this area and hope that no one shows up, or hope that if someone shows up, we win the fight. Because if you end up dying in this area, then you don't actually complete the mission. So we completed that quest and everyone started kind of moving. So I figured somebody must have seen something, or we would be going to the next PvP quest. Because there were 2 more quests, which were basically just gather something and do something else. Those are not essentially PvP missions. They are marked as PvP missions, but it's PvE missions where you are flagged for PvP. So you run the risk of having to fight someone if you do these missions. And we came to this bridge, and we weren't quite sure where to go from there. I wasn't quite sure where to go from there. Some people started deciding that we should go over the bridge and do the other part of the mission on the other side first. Now, this was just a sabotage mission, again, just a PvE mission. But then, if you look at the other side, there was a little swarm of something. I marked the quests, and then I only noticed then that there was actually a massive group of enemies running on the other side. I decided to hide behind this crate, and the first enemy came in, and I figured I'm gonna pick this guy off. I actually got a lot of healings while I was standing there, so that was really nice, so I could just stand there. He backed out pretty quickly, but my team wasn't really following at the time yet. I guess I wasn't in the comms, so yeah, I wanted to go. I wanted to try and get a pick here, because I was tired of waiting after we had waited in that area and not really gotten a fight. And I was kind of just scouting at the situation and trying to see if I could get a pick on someone. And then I found this one guy who was a bit on his own, and I was like, okay, you can go in here. And then I turned around and realized, oh, no one has actually gone any further. And I am all on my own. And I did not know what to do. I completely panicked. I didn't even use my dash in time. And I just got caught, and they all started pushing in. That was my first death and big mistake in this one. But I got lucky, because while I died, it seemed like most of the other players had died too, and they decided to regroup right in front of the town where I was, so I didn't really miss out on all too much, because there was a massive group of players that were in the same situation that I was in. We made our way back through the same path, but this time we were a little bit smarter. We didn't run through the water, and somebody was even smarter and put down a camp. And with this camp, we were able to save our respawn location. Now, this is something you can't just do all the time. You can only respawn there once during PvP, and then it gets a cooldown. But I figured this could give us a little bit of extra safety. So we started walking up the hill, and then I saw a little red sign. That was actually a bit unfair, because he was not that visible at that point yet. And you saw the name tag there, that was Carnifex. Carnifex actually ended up leveling almost at the same pace that I did, and I ran into him so many times. So that was pretty funny, and I recognized him because of the name, because of the band name, so that's pretty cool. And that was just a small group though. I figured, okay, we can take these guys on. They had a little camp there as well, but it was just 3 people. So, hey, let's go in there, right? Well, if you look at this horizon, there was already the next player coming in. And it seemed like my team was not really going up there yet. My faction was kind of just staying behind and walking around. But then eventually they started grouping up a little bit. We started getting some more people together, and I decided, okay, now we should have enough potential to fight. If we outplay them a little bit, that might just work out. And we went for it. I lost a lot of health there, but we actually got some pretty good hits on them. I think this was the better part of my fight here so far. And then I switched into my Berserk, and that would allow me to heal up quite a fair bit. So in that time, the entire team rolled up, and they cleaned them out very quickly. I was thinking that maybe we might be getting ambushed and that they were baiting us, but it was actually the other way around. I think this was because this was the smaller faction, the yellow faction, whereas a lot of the bigger attack was led by the purple faction, I think. So, then we saw some more movement on the horizon. We saw some shots going up there, and there were more enemies there, we figured. So, these were the next ones we had to check out, and check if we could check them out, quite literally. And those were actually still part of yellow, but we were able to get pretty close to them at first, and I thought we would have them there. And I decided I'm gonna jump down. I'm gonna chase them as far as I can. And if you recognize this territory, this was where basically the PvP mission was before. It's actually starting again. I was trying to get the pick on this guy, but I was out of range, and I didn't realize that I would have to dash in first and then use my abilities. Again, no PvP knowledge yet, and I couldn't close the distance, no matter how many abilities I used. And yeah, just kinda got away. And then the rest rolled up. It was actually yellow that rolled up. I wasn't sure anymore if it was purple or yellow, but it was the whole yellow squad. A relatively coordinated team for sure. And I started running and hoping that I could get away with my Berserk. I should have used the potion there. I probably would have survived that. I did not. But remember what we did before? We used the camp. And this camp will allow us to just respawn and kind of get back into the action, because the camp was actually not very far from where the whole fight was before anyways. So I just walked back up there and decided to have a look. And as you look closely, you can already see a lot of shadowy figures on the horizon. They were all kind of running up. I decided not to go for them and instead go back to where the team was before, so that we'd have more of an even fight and I wouldn't get picked apart by 5 people at once. You see the server struggling a little bit to keep up here. Unfortunately, there were some glitches at the time that caused some instability. This was in the first days of the beta. A lot of that was fixed very quickly afterwards, so it wasn't really a surprise, but it was a bit unlucky. Then we had one guy very confidently engaging, and I figured, okay, this is where I can make my play. Just unload my entire kit on him, and it worked out. If you look at the mastery I'm getting here and the XP, I got 1,400 XP, which is huge, and 1,400 weapon mastery. Normally for a mob you get like 20 to 50 or something, so that was gigantic. I got a whole mastery out of it. And then the enemies started coming in, and I was kind of distracted because I still was looking at my mastery, and there was an invasion happening at the same time, and the top of my screen was full of notifications, and there were enemies everywhere, so everything got very hectic. For a bit. And it was also super hard to see because we're in this corrupted area, which meant that the corruption enemies would be nearby as well, and we had to watch out with those as well. And if you look at look at behind me, basically there was actually one of them, an enemy with a skull above them, because there was so much higher level than we were, just chasing around as well. So that whole situation became very dangerous very quickly, because now we're not just dealing with the PvP enemies, but also with very strong PvE enemies that would probably like 2 to 3 shot us, if not 1 shot. So yeah, we had to get a very different position, and we did. We actually got on top of this mountain, which was a very good place to fight from, because now the enemies would be on the back foot and would have to fight up. And then this happened. This was super unfortunate. Lag detected meant that essentially the fight was over, that the server was frozen. This was an entire server crash. Again, this was on the first days, so nothing really came out of that. They were fixed like 2 or 3 days later. But in that moment, that was the end of that fight. A little anticlimactic, but at the same time also very cool because it was such an intense situation to end the fight in. But yeah, that was my first experience with PvP. I still, despite that ending, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button and ring the bell so you get notified of other upcoming New World videos as well. And if you'd like to, you can also subscribe to my second channel where I'll be making some more New World content. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this very first PvP raid, whatever you want to call it, open world PvP on a large scale that I thought was really fun and that I will try to much more participate in the live version of the game, because in the beta version I was kind of a little bit too hard focused on leveling up, and I think these early fights when everyone is just kind of figuring things out are just super fun, and you really want to be a part of it. With that, thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you for the next one soon. Sloth out.